So number one, understand the ask. So when you're writing a policy briefing, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter the department that you're in, the ministry that you're in, the level of government that you're in. The question is really understanding the asks. And it reminds you of something my grade 7 math teacher said to me. If you understand the problem, you're halfway there to solving it. And so what is the ask? Usually we're asked to write a briefing note to brief the minister, brief the deputy minister, brief a secretary, a cabinet secretary. So it doesn't really matter the jurisdiction you're in, the terminology can change. It's usually someone in senior management. Next, what's the purpose of this briefing note? Is it for information? Is it for a decision? Is it for recommendation? Is it for to outline options on a public policy issue? And so again, figuring out that point is really important. What else? Is this something that's a really hot issue? So is this something that the media is really capturing day in, day out, 24/7? We live in a 24/7 news cycle. And so the media can really keep the pressure on a number of public policy issues. And if so, then there might be an expediency element to it. And it's also really important to stay neutral. So it's a good segue to my next point, being concise, simple, and staying neutral. The one thing I love about Apolitical, in addition to that writing guide, is the name Apolitical. The name Apolitical suggests that it's nonpartisan, that it's professional, and I've seen nothing but that from Apolitical in all my experiences with Apolitical. And so as public servants, we're supposed to be, and we have to be, we take an oath, at least here in Canada we do, and I do believe we do in other governments as well, to be nonpartisan, professional, and impartial. And so even the terminology we use in our writing, so as I was saying, it's really important to be neutral in how we frame any issue. In the media, they tend to frame issues or individuals in the more sensationalist way, in the narrative of perhaps David and Goliath. I remember once there was a bit of a public debate happening here in Canada between two really high-ranking officials in government. I remember the headline being "The Clash of the Titans," which I think is a wonderful movie. I really enjoy watching that movie, but media often does take pop culture references, and especially they really try to add some oomph and add some jazziness, some sexiness to whatever the issue is. In our writing, we never use Clash of the Titans unless maybe you work in the tourism sector and there's something about movies. But really, my point here is to be neutral in the way you phrase things, in the way you write, and so that could also mean, if there's an issue, for example, climate change. I think many people believe in the environment. Many people acknowledge climate change, but some people do not. And so, how do you frame a briefing on climate change? And so, it's important to be very factual. And to be neutral as well. So, scientists have recognized the importance of climate change, and with climate change, there are a number of perspectives. Here, we will present the perspectives. Scientist A, or the report here, this parliamentary committee stated this, this, and this. Conciseness. And so keep reviewing your work and keep writing. I mentioned conciseness earlier. It's really important to be concise in our briefings. Often when these briefings go to, as I mentioned, go to really senior management, the minister, deputy minister, secretary. These are individuals that have little time and have a number of briefings to get through. So keeping your writing simple, keeping it concise is really important. I know this could be a challenge for new professionals or those kind of entering into government, especially recent graduates. When you're in university and college, you're used to, and I can totally vouch for this myself, I would stretch out my analysis. I would stretch out my papers and try to get that 20-page mark. I would add things to the bibliography and try to make it longer as possible. And in government, it's really the opposite. Being as short as concise as possible, as clear as possible, is really important to an effective briefing. It's important to review your work. And how do you get better? How do you write effective briefings? How do you get invited to give a class on mastering briefings? Practice. So the more briefing notes you write, the more briefing documents you write, the better you're going to get at it. The more opportunity you have to get feedback from your management, from your peers, the better your briefings will get. I always encourage, especially new professionals, when you're starting out in government, your first briefing note that you're really proud of, that made it to possibly the minister, save it. Keep it in a little kind of folder of your briefing notes. But when the next briefing note gets there, maybe it's 6 months down the road, or maybe you're writing a lot of briefings, and so you have a lot of briefings that go up to the minister. But down the road, maybe a year mark, 2-year mark, compare the briefing note that was your first that went up to the one that goes up 6 months from now and then 2 years afterwards. And you'll definitely notice a difference because now you've had more time to practice, you've had more opportunities to get feedback, you've had more experience, more confidence. And how do you get confidence? It's by practicing. It's by really practicing, trying something over and over again, getting good feel for it, a good comfort level with it. And that's really important. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of time. So as I mentioned, if there's a really hot issue, the briefing note was really due yesterday kind of thing. Those realities do happen. Clear messaging really helps in those, but sometimes we do have a little more time. And so in those cases, I would suggest, if you're not sure about a briefing note, ask a colleague to review it, ask somebody who's a senior analyst to review it, possibly even ask your manager to review it, depending on how much time one has. And so getting peer-to-peer feedback can be quite helpful. Especially before you make a final submission on a briefing product. Take the chance to grow your influence. I'm a firm believer that you have a greater ability to influence in government than outside of government. And so when you're an analyst and you're being asked to write a briefing product, it's up to you to conduct your research, conduct your analysis, and really put together the best briefing as possible. And so how you frame something, how you want to reinforce a point, the recommendations you make. If your briefing note goes up the line, people are going to be reading your recommendations, your ideas, your speaking points. I remember once I was writing speaking points for the clerk of the Privy Council, which here in Canada is the head of the public service. And I kid you not, that night, the clerk popped up in my dream. I was so absorbed by this task of writing speaking points for the clerk that I dreamt about him. And so I'm just sharing a little story. First of all, it's a weird story, and I'm probably not going to share any other of my dreams. But when you're really absorbed in something, when you're really committed to something, it goes into your psyche. And so in that case, I was really there's a level of stress, but I was really focused on that, and I wanted to do a good job at writing speaking notes for the clerk, and he popped into my dream. Measuring success. So I mentioned before that getting feedback is important. I also mentioned before that save copies of your briefing notes. So at different periodic points, it allows you to kind of compare and contrast. The other thing you can do also is get feedback not just from your manager, but your peers again. So if someone's a senior analyst and you're working quite closely with them, you might ask them for feedback on how you've grown, or what are the areas of improvement, for example. And so people can be quite subjective. Briefing notes and writing briefings is really an art and not a science. That's a really big point that I wanted to reinforce today. And so people have different writing styles. People, for example, I love the Oxford comma. I know some people despise the Oxford comma. We may not be able to be friends, but the point is that people have different writing styles, and it's okay to have different writing styles because the underlying principles, which are displayed here on the screen, are what's really important, because these are timeless. So understand the problem, keep your writing simple, neutral, concise. Review your work. One thing I could mention before is do a spell check. It's amazing how many times a little typo you might miss on your own, but spell check has your back. Spell check will pick up will pick up on those typos. Keep writing, practice, and you have an opportunity to influence. So definitely use it. And there's no point of practicing if you're not measuring your success. So I think it's good to take moments to reflect and see where you can improve and how you can get better. So these are kind of my underlying principles for writing effective briefings.